You're listening to the #1 podcast for nonprofit leaders, getting your nonprofit fully funded. This is the Fundraising Masterminds Podcast. The last thing you want to do is say to everybody in the world, we're going to raise $5 million and then raise $100,000, right? And kind of look like you don't know what you're doing.
Too many organizations will jump into a capital campaign because someone wants a new parking lot, the wing should be built to the school, and all of a sudden when we start to do a feasibility study, we'll find that there is a tremendous misunderstanding that, you know what, we would prefer that you pay down the debt on the last capital campaign before you start building a parking lot.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Fundraising Masterminds Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Galasinski, and my co-host, Jim Dempsey.
Hey, Jason.
And we are so excited that you are tuning in because we've got a great episode about capital campaigns. Specifically, we're going to talk about the feasibility of a capital campaign because a capital campaign is a lengthy process. It's a 3 to 5 year process. And a lot of people who are interested in doing a capital campaign, there's a process that you have to go through to determine whether you are indeed eligible for a capital campaign. And that's the process that we call the feasibility study.
I can't tell you how many people, Jason, venture into a capital campaign before doing a feasibility study. Then they end up falling flat on their face, raise far less than they expected. They burned through their opportunities and missed everything.
Well, everyone loves the idea of a capital campaign. I mean, like if you said, how would you like to raise $10 million to build your school? It's like, well, yeah, I'd love to do that.
Sure.
But is that feasible?
Right.
Is that actually possible?
Yeah.
How do you actually do it?
Yeah.
Well, it's all about who you know.
Right.
The feasibility study is kind of like an audit of your organization where we are coming in and we're kind of doing like a donor audit to see like who are all the people who give to your organization, how much do they give, what's the frequency that they give, and you do all kinds of stuff. So we're going to talk about all the things that we do in a feasibility study. Well, Jim, before we get into what we do with a feasibility study, why don't you talk to me about the benefits of a feasibility study?
Oh, absolutely, Jason, because there are a good number of benefits. What I would say is, first of all, the first benefit is identifying who the prospects are for your capital campaign gifts. The interview process, the audit, everything that you talked about earlier really leads us to the point where we identify who are some key individuals who can be our lead gift individuals for the campaign. Yeah. It also helps us identify who the leaders are for the campaign, utilizing both people and money. Those two things are critical to success of a capital campaign. Right. So finding out who your key leaders are to that campaign are so important. We're also going to try and understand what are the doubts, the misconceptions, the questions that people have about your campaign. Too many organizations will jump into a capital campaign because someone wants a new parking lot, somebody thinks the wing should be built to the school, that you should be purchasing some land to build something. And all of a sudden, when we start to do a feasibility study, we'll find that there is a tremendous misunderstanding that, you know what, we would prefer that you pay down the debt on the last capital campaign before you start building a parking lot or another wing to that. So it's eliminating a lot of the doubts and misconceptions that come along. It also helps you test your fundraising prospectus or your case for support. You get to find out, is this really something that is sellable, marketable to people, and are they willing to buy that product per se? So the feasibility study allows us to do that. And it also allows us, it really prevents those embarrassing failures, those things that are going to cause you to look bad in the public, to stumble publicly with people, and to really turn you into a downward spiral rather than the positive upward spiral. Those are the things that really are the benefits to a capital campaign.
Okay, so what are some of the objectives of a feasibility study?
Yeah, well, some of the objectives of feasibility study is, first of all, you want to assess the image of your campaign as a whole. So in other words, you want to find out, if I'm going to put a case for support and I'm going to put a strategy out there, I want to know, how is it going to sell to people? What do I need to do to market it well so that it comes across as positively as we possibly can?
Right.
And I've been involved in too many campaigns in churches and things where it didn't start out well from the beginning. Out of the blocks, the image of what they were trying to do was negative, but yet people pushed forward and they raised far less than they could have. It also allows you to determine the internal readiness of your organization to have a capital campaign. What I mean by that is readiness with people, readiness with leadership. Are people trained to be able to lead a campaign? And do you have the internal logistics to be able to sustain a capital campaign? Computers, software, the marketing materials. Do you have graphic artists to be able to do renderings of those the property or the land that you're going to be doing? All those things are so important. It also will allow you to find out what is the leadership that's actually available out there to you. Do you have a deep pool of leaders, or are you very, very shallow in those volunteers in leadership? Because a capital campaign to succeed really requires a strong leadership structure, and that's so important on that.
When you say strong leadership structure, you're not talking about employees of the organization.
No, great question. No, we're talking about volunteer leadership. That's, I believe, one of the beauties of a capital campaign is that you don't have to have a broad breadth of staff or a deep staff, as long as you've got well-equipped and capable volunteers who are on board and ready. Those individuals can come alongside and be the leaders for your capital campaign.
When you say volunteers, you're not saying food pantry volunteers. You're talking about financial volunteers, right? Or
no, I'm talking about individuals who are, as an example, if you're in a church, there's some of individuals who have day jobs. They're stockbrokers, they're real estate agents, they're insurance agents, they have other doctors, lawyers, they have other jobs, but they decide that they want to volunteer their time to help your capital campaign. Typically, they're elders, they're deacons, they're committee members in your church who volunteer anyway, but those are the individuals that you're talking about from the volunteer standpoint.
So you want to know if these people exist.
Yes, that's exist, and what's their availability. Yeah, are they willingness to help? You also want to use this as a way to properly time your campaign. We know, as you mentioned, that a typical capital campaign is going to be anywhere between 3 and 5 years. You want to make sure that you are testing while you're doing your feasibility study when you should start, when you should end, when is the best timing. Do you want to start your capital campaign in December, right as you're getting ready to get year-end gifts? Do you want to start it in the summertime when people could be on vacation? Timing is extremely important when it comes to that as well too. It also want to gather as much information as you can as you're planning ahead and plotting for the plan and strategy and where people are available. And you also want to do a SWOT analysis. You want to address the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats that exist within your organization.
Okay, so all of this stuff that you do is to determine whether they can actually do a capital campaign, or is it whether they can hit a certain goal in the capital campaign?
Well, that's a great question, because the answer is yes. You want to determine all those kinds of things. You want to determine, number one, whether they can even do a capital campaign, but it also helps you determine that, okay, you can do a capital campaign, but certainly not at the level of support that you thought.
Right. Or maybe to the level.
Or to the level. Or it also could determine that you could go far beyond the level.
Yeah.
You may set a goal of $2 million, and you may find that you've got enough support to have a campaign of $4 million, and that you can build out that basement or that stairwell that you never expected you could do.
Right.
But most of the time, it's determining you are thinking 10 million, but in reality, you might only be able to handle 4 million. That's some of the key things related to that.
All right, so you sold me on the importance of doing a feasibility study, but what does this include?
Oh, absolutely. Well, you used the term earlier, and it's so correct. You use fact finding. Mm-hmm. This is a lot of fact finding in research. We've got to collect data and pull that data together to report on our ultimate findings. Those include really 3 key elements. Number 1, it generally includes a mail survey. So you're putting out a survey to the general mailing list, which includes questions on their understanding, their interest, and how they feel about this campaign, and also their willingness to give. But an element that's even more important than that are personal interviews. This is where we go to the critical few, which is part of your organization. We've talked about the critical few, the 20% that bring in 80% of your dollars.
Yep.
And we're meeting with those individuals, and we're asking them a series of questions, such as, have you heard about the need for a new parking lot, a new wing at the school?
Right.
What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that's a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Is it important? How needed is it? And we're going to be testing certain levels of interest in that. Mm-hmm. If we went that way, how well do you think you have an understanding of the need that's out there?
Right.
If we did move in that direction, would you be willing to give? And if you're willing to give, how much would you be willing to give to that? Mm-hmm. All those questions are really helping us build the case for whether we should move forward or not. So you're getting the mail survey, which is your masses, but then you've got your targeted survey, which is the interview.
So here's a question. Isn't that kind of like, I don't know, stealing the thunder of the campaign? I mean, like, I'm just wondering this.
Yeah.
Part of a campaign is like you want to present like this big idea and like we want to build a gymnasium and it's going to be awesome, and so you want to have it all mapped out, and if you do all this like prerequisite, like if we built a gymnasium and if we did this, isn't that kind of like, well, I don't know if I would give to it or not, I never thought about it, and it depends on, like, wouldn't you get back quite, things like, well, it depends. I don't know. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. I don't know.
Well, actually, the answer is yes, and that's what you want. You want to know how deep is their knowledge and their interest. Because I'll give you an example. At when we were getting ready to build our church on our property, one of the things that we saw, and then that was a huge need, we wanted to grow younger couples, and our nursery and our childcare efforts were busting out of the seams. There were kids on top of kids in our small, and that was something that came to the surface immediately in a feasibility study, that we want to bring in more kids. We can't bring in more small young families because we have no space for them. That was a key marketing element for us as we sold the capital campaign and the need for the capital campaign. That was identified in the feasibility study, that number one, people really wanted new facilities for our kids and our young people. And so that was huge. So you are going to get some, maybe, it depends. I don't know. But if, we have a series of standards that I'll talk about in a few minutes. And we've determined at certain levels whether it's important to move forward. If there's almost no knowledge, you don't get any reading on the meter at all as far as interest, then maybe we don't do a capital campaign. But if we're seeing 60 to 70 to potentially 80% interest in doing this, we're moving forward. So all those things are important. Now, the last element is the internal audit, or the survey that goes out internally. And we're determining what are the logistical staffing needs. And this is where we are talking about staff. Do we have administrative staff? Do we have support staff that can help process the paperwork and help to research who are potential candidates, individuals, researching what the giving history of people is in the past.
Yeah.
And we're also looking at what kind of equipment do we have? Are we using antiquated computers that it would take days to get reports and get letters out? Or are we talking about we've got some up-to-date information? And what about software? Are we still using Windows 97 in our church?
Right.
Those are the kinds of things that survey will assess. So those are the three key items: interviews, mail survey, and the internal survey.
As someone who has done a lot of capital campaigns, what are some of the factors that you're looking into that would determine whether the capital campaign would be successful or not?
Well, typically I'm looking for a couple factors. First of all, I'm looking for, is there something to sell? So we need to know, if I ask, what's your thoughts on the young program and our housing? If people are saying, we don't have any needs for a building. Well, right there, if I don't have something to sell, then it's not going to move forward. So I want to make sure that I know, is there something to sell?
Right.
Secondly, I want to know, is there somebody to sell it? Now, I mentioned earlier that building a leadership structure is going to be vital to this. It's friends inviting their friends. So it's the chairman challenging two co-chairs, those co-chairs challenging individuals who will be committee chairs, and those committee chairs challenging people underneath them. They're challenging them not only for their time, but they're also making financial challenges to these people. Okay. So all along the line, we want people to give so that we get anywhere between 10 to 20% of your total goal from this team in here. So it's got to be somebody who is willing to be out there and to sell. Because I can't tell you how many capital campaigns I've done where someone says, you know what? I'm willing to give money myself, but I don't want to ask somebody else for money. Or I'll be happy to ask a lot of people for money. Do you need money from me too? Because I can't do that. Well, you need both. You need both those two components. They're so important. You need to make sure that there's somebody to sell to.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to have just a top-heavy organization where you have people who are giving, but the rest of the people don't see a need. And so you need to make sure, and the feasibility study will let us know, is there enough interest within the body of Christ in a sense, whether it's a church, a Christian school, a nonprofit ministry, whatever it is. Are there people to sell to? And so that's so important. And you need to also make sure that there's effective campaign dynamics. What I mean by that is, are we understanding the human nature side of things, that people need to be asked, and they need to be asked clearly, not just a blanket, would you give to the capital campaign, but will you prayerfully consider a gift of $10,000 over the next 3 years to give to this capital campaign? So they need to understand those principles. We don't need people to go in already trained. That's where Fundraising Masterminds comes in. We go in and help train the leaders on how to sell, but we need to make sure that those people have an interest there. And lastly, we need to make sure there are going to be some seed monies. Is there money going to come up front from those lead gifts? Are we going to have enough lead gifts that when we get into that final phase, that we're going to have a good amount of the money already taken care of? So those are all very, very important.
Yeah, and you have some statistics here of percentages of things that need to be at a certain level in order for the capital campaign to work.
Yes.
Can you go over some of that?
Oh, I'll be happy to. In fact, that's actually one of my funnest portions of it, because we've got really clear-cut demarcation points, and if you're not there, it's very easy for us to indicate whether it's there. If your gas tank is empty, you know very clearly you can't drive much further. Right. So the first one is that we want to make sure, is there current approval of the programs and the staff? Or do people like the staff? Do they feel like the church or the leadership of the nonprofit organization, Christian school, whatever it is? Is there support of the programs and the staffing? We want to make sure that 80% of the respondents in both the interviews and the surveys support the organizational leadership and the programs.
So it comes back 20%.
Then wow, there's a problem with credibility. Yeah, okay. They've got a problem with the leader, maybe an autocratic leader, maybe a passive leader. Yes, those are the kinds of things that you have to worry about. Secondly, you want to acknowledge the need for fundraising. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that if we don't come back with an 80% response on that people know that they need a new facility and that the only way to do that is by raising money. That's a great indicator for us that people say, you know what, we need it. If you get 60% of the people saying we just need to sit on our hands, not worth it.
Don't touch it.
Don't touch it. Exactly. We also want to have a perception that there's a sound appeal. Mm-hmm. That's so important that people understand that they know that the need is there and that asking for money is going to make a big difference, and that what we are selling is that people are willing to buy. And that's important. 80% on that as well, too. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that that's out there. We also want to make sure that there's financial participation. So that survey and those interviews will let us know, do we have people who have indicated to us already they're willing to give money? Now, we know that with good marketing, with good materials, we can take people from 80% to 100% in their giving. Mm-hmm. So if someone says, I can give $100,000 over the next 3 years, that potentially they could even give $150,000 or $200,000 with good marketing. And that's what we need to know. We also want to make sure that are people willing to invest their time and their talents in this effort? We want to make sure that we're structuring our leadership with people who are born leaders and that they've proven that they are willing to lead and they have time. I've had capital campaigns where somebody they have the title of chair, but they're not willing to invest the time. And I've had to ask some people to step out because they haven't been the best person in there. And we can go as low as 60% on that one. And then overall, is there enthusiasm for the campaign, for the effort? And we want to make sure that 80% are there. So those are all the key indicators that we need to have for a good successful campaign.
So to sum that up again, it's 80% approval on the staff and the programs. We need an 80% approval on acknowledging the need for fundraising. We need a 80% approval on the perception of the sound appeal. We need a 75% approval that people are they're willing to give to something. We need a 60% approval of time and talent investment, and 80% need to be overall excited about the capital campaign.
That's right.
If those things are coming back false, then they're red flags and you should not do a capital campaign.
That's right. Exactly.
It doesn't mean though that you can't raise money or can't even achieve your goals. Actually, one of the organizations that I love to highlight, it's called the Garden Gate Ranch, and they had a vision one day of reaching women that were stuck in child sex trafficking, and they wanted to help these women, especially women that had children, to have a safe place to get some help,
to escape,
and to raise a child. And they had this dream 6 years ago to build a ranch with horses and
stables and housing
and to have people living there that were on site that could care for these women and educate them and help them to have a safe place. And it's a big vision. They wanted to have several acres. They wanted to have several buildings. And they could have said right from the beginning, let's do a capital campaign. And they probably would have failed the feasibility study. Although they would have passed in several of these factors.
Maybe enthusiasm and some of the others, right?
But they probably didn't have the necessary, funding or the leaders in place to be able to do that. So what we were able to do is not, instead of saying, well, sorry, we can't make that dream happen.
Right.
We just pivoted to a different method.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things one of the takeaways I want you to get out of this as you're listening to this is, if you are listening to this and you're going, wow, I thought I wanted to do a capital campaign, but everything you're telling me sounds very complicated. I don't know if we can do it. Maybe, maybe not. It's not hopeless. It just means that maybe the capital campaign isn't right for you.
Right.
And we need to pivot to a different alternative strategy. And what we did for these guys is we actually set up a series of perfect vision dinners.
Right.
And if you don't know what a perfect vision dinner is, there's a QR code on the screen you can scan, and that will take you to a website that will explain to you what our perfect vision dinner strategy is. But we set up a series of perfect vision dinners over the course of 6 years that built their organization block by block by block. And now here we are 6 years later. The house exists, the land exists. They just did their 6th fundraiser dinner, the Perfect Vision Dinner Strategy, where their goal was to raise $800,000, and they are accomplishing the dream that they've always wanted to do.
Yeah.
But it happened over a series of years, and so the point I'm trying to get to is that you can do a capital campaign and raise $4 million all in, one shot, so to speak, or you can do a series of vision dinners and kind of like build up small, right? And you might be able to raise all the 4 million that you need over the course of 10 years.
Right. That's right.
And still accomplish the same thing.
Right.
So like you always like to say, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. And so one bite of each year could be a vision dinner.
Yeah.
Right. Another approach is that you could use a series of vision dinners to build your base. And then that base of people could become your critical few.
Your leadership.
Springboard you into the capital campaign.
That's right. It's kind of baby steps or ramped up, whatever we want to call, to get to that point.
Jim, any final words that you want to say about a feasibility study for a capital campaign?
Yeah, feasibility study is so important before you venture out. Like I said very early on, I have had just countless organizations think they could venture into a capital campaign without doing a feasibility study, and unfortunately, they fell flat on their face, and really they ruined their opportunity because their reputation was sullied, and it just is so sad. So don't venture into a capital campaign without a feasibility study.
The last thing you want to do is say to everybody in the world, we're going to raise $5 million and then raise $100,000 and kind of look like people you don't know what you're doing.
Right. And trust me, I've seen it.
Yeah. So definitely it's worth to do a feasibility study first so that you can have the confidence of doing a capital campaign. And if you found this to be helpful, let us know in the comments and ask us a question. We actually personally read every single question that you write in the comments. So we would love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. You can subscribe on YouTube as well as Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Some episodes are pretty meaty like this one, and some episodes are light and fluffy and fun. But all the episodes are focused on helping you build your toolkit for getting your nonprofit fully funded. So if that's something that you're interested in, subscribe, and please tell your friends and other people who are running nonprofits, because we'd love to get the word out and impact as many people as possible. Well, thank you again for tuning in to this episode of Fundraising Masterminds. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Take care.